Well, good evening, everyone. This is Mike O'Malley here with the Hurricane Season 2020 update, part of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion for August 22nd, 2020, recorded around 7:55 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be focusing on our two primary tropical cyclones today, Tropical Storm Laura and Tropical Storm Marco, which is both respectively in the Caribbean at this point in time. So first of all, with Tropical Storm Laura, maximum sustained winds of 45 knots or 50 miles per hour with a pressure of 1,004 millibars moving west at 18 miles per hour. A couple of additional changes has occurred since we first talked earlier this afternoon. First and foremost, we have a tropical storm watch that is in effect for all of Cuba, basically all of the central and western portions of Cuba. A tropical storm warning has been issued for the southern tip of Cuba there, where this is expected to kind of come across right here. Other additional changes to this forecast include a tropical storm watch for Abaco Island and a tropical storm watch for the Florida Keys all the way up to near Miami-Dade County. So we do have tropical storm watches for Florida, tropical storm watches and warnings for the Bahamas, tropical storm watches and warnings for Cuba, and tropical storm warnings for both the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and also for St. Croix and Puerto Rico. That is the changes with this additional update. And again, a little bit more of an easterly track overall today with Laura. Again, from our previous thoughts that this might continue on a more west-northwestern trajectory, which is still possible. It has indeed shifted a little bit to the right today, with there being some interactions with Tropical Storm Marco, which is also possible, and it's making this forecast all the more complex from that. Now, if we take a look here at kind of what's going on, don't mind the blip, that's basically just the satellite imagery loading. But our tropical cyclone is still out here, and we talked earlier how there was a mesovortex that was trying to take over near Puerto Rico and move northwest. Now, that moved over Puerto Rico and did indeed weaken a little bit, and its low-level center that tried to drill its way to the ground actually got significantly disrupted. Now, if we kind of zoom in here, you can see a fairly potent low-level circulation center or a mid-level circulation center here approaching the Dominican Republic area. And you notice, though, there's also, respectively, some deeper convection off towards the north right here. And we're starting to get well away from the radar site here in San Juan, near San Juan. So it's fairly hard to actually get a good bird's eye view of what's going on out here. And that's why the recon plane, which is coming up now here, is going to kind of come down and investigate this cyclone and see what's actually going on with it, because we've had fairly substantial changes, and it is possible that this circulation center may actually be a little bit north of where the hurricane center forecast is. There's also fairly substantial convection to the south right here. There's fairly substantial convection, and we can't see it because the radar is too far away from all this precipitation, but fairly substantial convective blow up to the south here of the Hispaniola area. And that is something that we'll really have to watch, is how does this area down here interact with the northern part of this. And again, we talked about how there is the potential for a very complex setup here. And you can kind of see that spin right here in the atmosphere. And that's the current Hurricane Center forecast that takes it basically right over this area. Now, this is a little bit away from where it currently is, where we could see a circulation center in this vicinity. And that's why recon is going to be very helpful in kind of determining that. We can kind of see that we have winds out here that may be suggesting that we have that, but it's very hard to determine whether or not we actually have a closed center in this region, and that's why recon is going to be very helpful in determining that situation setup. Now, we can see some of the complexities here on the HMON model, and then we'll take a look here at the H-Wharf in a second, but we can see some of the complexities in the H-Wharf, or I'm sorry, this is the HMON. This is the latest AT&Z run here of the HMON, and we'll just kind of move this forward. And again, this is where the circulation center is, roughly right through here. That's about 21Z. We'll move that forward to roughly about 8 o'clock. This is 0Z or 8 o'clock. And that is getting awfully close to the coast there. And pressures of about 997. It is possible that there might be a fairly focal or very focused and localized area of deep convection and associated low pressure in this vicinity. But again, until we get recon in there, it's going to be hard to depict that. Now, as we go forward with time, a couple of things to note here. First of all, I'm going to step one frame back and then another frame there, and I'll just step 2 frames. You notice the correction that the H-Wharf has been, or the H-Mount has been consistently doing, is it's been moving the Cyclone Center further north over the past 2 runs. We'll actually move that, you can kind of see where it was on this 3rd run here, and then we'll move this forward. That was the 0Z run from last night, and then that is the 18Z run today. So it's in relative proximity to the 0Z last night. And what we'll really have to watch is, you notice how, while our actual center location is popped up in here, you notice that there's still some isobars that are out here. This is lines of equal pressure. And those isobars obviously form around to form a closed low-level circulation center. Basically, you can close those isobars. But you notice that we have these isobars that are still sticking out here, and that center is not that far inland. That's maybe, we'll do kind of a measurement here. This is from tropicaltidbits.com, by the way. That is only maybe about 20 to 30 nautical miles off the coast there of the Dominican Republic. And that's important because from the previous run, you notice how it's much weaker and it tracked it right over the island, the tall mountains here. And that would just kill off any sort of hope for a circulation there. But with this possibility, this opens the door to a possible center reformation further north, almost like what we saw with Isaias, that this ended up becoming a circulation center with Isaias, and then of course it moved out through that region. Now, that's not going to be the same thing that's going to happen with Laura, but we can kind of see how that's illustrated. That eventually pops out here into the the Caribbean here in the southwestern Atlantic and the Bahamas, and then eventually moves it over portions of Cuba once again. But you can kind of see it just scrapes here, and Cuba is not a very wide it's not a very wide landmass. So, we're talking on the order of maybe, 10 or 20 miles. That may be the difference of onshore versus offshore. And you can see here that the model does indeed try to bring this further inland on the HMON, and does in fact kind of weaken it, and then eventually pop it back out here near the Florida Keys before finally strengthening it back into a hurricane out here. But you notice that this is a fairly weak area on the HMON in through here, and it's barely producing tropical storm force winds that are out to Key West. Now, we have tropical storm watches in effect for all of Key West. All of the Florida Keys are under tropical storm watches all the way up to near Miami-Dade County, and even Albacoa Island, which is right here. That's Albacoa Island. And yes, the model, it does indicate that maybe some tropical storm force winds could get over there to Abaco Island. So that will be something to monitor now. Now, on the flip side of things, this is the H-Wharf model. This is basically the hurricane weather research and forecast model specifically designed for hurricanes. The other model was the old GFDL. This is the H-Wharf. And we can kind of see what happens is that these centers become competing. This is by 3Z tomorrow morning, so very early, about I think it's about 11 tonight or whatever. But you can really see how this is not a very well-defined structure. Now, notice what you have over here is you have yet another closed center of circulation right here. Well, this might be a low-level center. This might be a mid-level center. And this is very hard to see how this actually interacts, because these two systems are basically going to be interacting with one another. And it is entirely possible that either this mid-level center tries to get tugged further south, or this low-level center, indicated here on the H Wharf, tries to get tugged further north. And we saw this happening earlier today with that mid-level center trying to tug and drill down a low-level center down here before moving out something like this. So yes, it's entirely possible that that may happen, and then the H Wharf kind of brings it out. And again, you know, it brings it though over some of the island, some of the mountainous areas. So, you know, whatever circulation center that we have may be significantly disrupted, but not disrupted enough. And the H Wharf eventually deepens it down here, you know, 995, before kind of crashing this once again into Cuba. And it just keeps this train of land interaction, but not a lot, and then eventually deepens this into a pretty strong storm at that point in time. And you can see this is, though, closer to the Florida Keys, and thus it is producing tropical storm force winds in portions of the Florida Keys, and especially Key West over here. So the H Wharf is a solution that would be more so oriented towards the Florida Keys. Now, you know, that is something that we'll have to watch here, but it's not necessarily a guaranteed scenario. And for what it's worth, this is the GFS 18Z run as well. And the 18Z run actually of the GFS is actually, or has been following more of the previous runs of the H Wharf, where we can actually see the center of circulation passing just north or just over along the coastal areas of Hispaniola and the Dominican Republic, and then kind of skirting the Cuba area right here. And again, this would be a potential threat for Albico Island to bring, or for the, you know, Albico area. That's Nassau right there. But that could bring some tropical storm force winds to that area, and that could also consequently bring tropical storm force winds over to portions of the Florida Keys. And that gets it actually all the way up to near Miami-Dade County. So it is a theoretical possibility that there is tropical storm force winds all the way up to near Miami if the GFS were to inexplicably verify, but there's a lot of considerable uncertainty in both the HMON, H-Wharf, and GFS as to how far east this actually gets in the short term. So, you know, the GFS was actually kind of latching on this northern mesovortice kind of being the dominant center now. And also, one thing to kind of note is that if this does track over Hispaniola in the Dominican Republic and Haiti, can it form another center to the north and kind of take off from there and completely avoid any land interaction with Cuba at all? And that is a very real possibility, but it's not something that we really can actually say for sure currently. So that's going to be something we're going to have to watch here very carefully. Now, on with the rest here. Tropical Storm Marco, a fairly significant change, another very significant change in the modeling and in the forecast for today. And this is one of the other problems that we're going to face for land threat potential, but also for what could become of Tropical Storm Laura and how it could interact with Marco. So we'll have to really see. First of all, sustained winds are near 55 knots with, you know, that's roughly correlating to about 65 miles per hour with gusts up to near hurricane force, a pressure of 992, moving north-northwest at 13 miles per hour. So the big changes today, first of all, in the early morning hours, this was taking off into a stronger tropical system, and it was moving more north. And because of that today, this has actually prompted a response of a hurricane watch for portions of Louisiana and extreme western Mississippi, with a tropical storm watch to the Alabama, Mississippi, and western Florida Panhandle line. And the tropical storm watch includes Lake Pontchartrain with a storm surge watch for that area as well. This is expected to be a hurricane on approach, but there is some considerable uncertainty. And if you live in the western Florida panhandle, I would not take your eye off of this, as there is the potential that this could directly impact you. And we'll talk about why that is here in a moment. But again, there is the potential that this actually could deviate either towards the right or even deviate towards the left here. And it could be weaker. And just real quick, a weaker system in here means that it is going to go further west. So that is something to take in mind here. And then again, a stronger storm is going to go further towards the right. So these just kind of show the discrepancies between both systems here. Now we'll take a look here at what's going on, and you can kind of clearly see this in the satellite imagery here. And again, we have our circulation center actually positioned in through here. And this is one of the things that we can kind of see. This is our circulation center in through here. It's very, very small. That's the western part of Cuba right there. In that is the Yucatan Peninsula. This is basically shooting the Yucatan Channel in through here, and this has now entered the Gulf of Mexico. Now you can also see that we do have a jet interaction occurring with our tropical cyclone right now, and that is actually carrying some of this precipitation into Florida. And we can kind of see how we do have some storms actually in Florida that are kind of blowing along with this flow, and that's because of this jet interaction. We have some vertical wind shear across Florida today, which has been helping to induce some cyclonic rotation in some of the thunderstorms that have actually developed. And we'll talk about some obvious discrepancies with Laura here in a moment. But you can also see another blob of deep convection out here that will eventually kind of be moving off towards, and rotating around, obviously, because, this is a rotating mass. This whole center right now is moving generally in this general direction, and this is going to eventually kind of shoot up towards the north and then eventually bend off towards the northwest, but that may not happen, and we'll kind of show that why here in a moment. Now, the latest reconnaissance aircraft that was in there did find pressures a little bit higher today of 996 millibars, and that's because the inner core structure has degraded a little bit in response to vertical wind shear. And we can kind of see that here on the GFS forecast. This is the 18Z run, and again, our cyclone is initialized here at about 1,000 millibars, so it is a couple millibars off, but regardless, we can see that this is the jet interaction we were talking about. We have this upper level trough that's kind of digging in across the Midwest and Southeast United States right now. And our trough axis is positioned roughly in through this region, in through here. That's our trough axis. Now, what's actually happening is we have vertical wind shear coming from the southwest blowing towards the northeast in this general vicinity in through here. That is helping to, as the system is moving off in the due north direction, this is helping to actually create some vertical wind shear, because the low level flow right now is out of the basically the southeast blowing towards the northwest, and that wants to steer the storm northwest. But we have the upper level flow coming out here from the southwest and blowing towards the northeast, which wants to basically basically control the storm going towards the north or northeast. So what that actually ends up creating is vertical wind shear. And one of the things that's very important is that if this is actually a stronger cyclone, there's a chance of basically shooting up and coming straight north, and that would put more of Alabama, Mississippi, and the western Florida panhandle in more of that threat zone, because you can see that vertical wind shear starts to abate here and then actually shifts further off towards the west here, and that vertical wind shear actually relaxes a tad bit. But what ends up happening is it completely dissipates the cyclone. There's a lot of dry air entrainments, etc. And you can start to see where the cyclone changes from going more northerly. We'll highlight that in better color. Going from more northerly to going more northwesterly. And that's because the lower and shallower the cyclone is in the atmosphere, the more of the northwest flow it's going to feel in the atmosphere. Thus, it's going to get steered further off towards the north and west further. And that then would put portions of eastern and central Louisiana in play here. However, again, if we have a stronger cyclone, this would then try to shoot further north. Now, that's not necessarily the complete case as the HMON shows, but this is the Wharf model basically depicting our cyclone. And this is the 18Z run. This is the initialization here as of about 15 minutes ago, pressure about 990. So it's just slightly overdoing it. But you notice in this in the next frame here, 997, and it actually starts to weaken it. You notice some of that dry air that's getting entrained into the cyclone. And if we do an average sounding over the cyclone here, this is from tropicaltidbits.com, by the way. If we take kind of an average sounding, you notice what's actually occurring. If you know how to read the photograph, that obviously read it, but you can see that we have that wind shear flow aloft with more of that northwesterly flow aloft, and at the surface we have more of that northerly or northeasterly flow. So there's a lot of competing factors that are ongoing with Marco right now, and you can actually see how it starts to deviate further off towards the right here, or further towards the left, because this is now getting a shallower cyclone. And a shallower system, as we just previously talked about, is going to go further off towards the left. So this actually kind of just jumps around here for a while, but you do notice that this kind of just jumps around and it has a hard time organizing, but some of this moisture gets streamed in and pumped in from the shear off towards the north, and that causes some showers and thunderstorms over the western Florida Panhandle, Mississippi, and Alabama. And in a highly sheared environment, that could produce actually a couple of tornadoes and some of these rain bands. So even if it is a weak tropical cyclone or just a remnant circulation, it is going to be in a highly sheared environment down and through here with that warm Gulf of Mexico, and that could help to induce some tornadoes and severe weather across portions of the Gulf Coast states as what's left of Marco comes in there. So that's going to be very important. And again, we'll continue to watch that here over the next few days, as that will have some implications there on Laura. And real quick look here at Laura. This is basically the surface wind field and the watches and warnings. Again, for reiteration, tropical storm watches for portions of the Florida Keys, Abaco Island, the Bahamas, and the western parts of Cuba. And as this continues to move off towards the west or northwest, again, it's going to be very curious to see if this does indeed reform a new system in a new area of vorticity to the north, and that kind of misses the islands completely and takes a further north track towards the Florida Keys. And that's going to be something that we're really going to have to watch here. Now, for the central Florida area, you are not out of the woods necessarily, because even if this does come in through this vicinity or this vicinity and through here, there is going to be strong rain bands that could rotate around from time to time. And for what it's worth, there is going to be higher rain chances as the moisture gets pumped in over central Florida and east central Florida. So isolated tornadoes, some gusty winds, and some of those rain bands cannot be completely ruled out. And even some tropical storm force gusts and some of those rain bands cannot be completely ruled out. So just because you won't get a landfalling cyclone coming, straight up the peninsula or anything like that, more than likely, I say more than likely because you can never say never, but more than likely you won't have that, but you will still have some impacts for those areas. So, if you live, in central Florida, just kind of keep monitoring it. Obviously, the Florida Keys and everywhere else under these watches and warnings, and even the Gulf Coast, needs to be monitoring this fairly carefully. All right. With that being said, hope you all have a great rest of your evening here, and I will be continuing to update on Twitter, of course, at MikeRumali1. Go follow me there. Links will be down in the description down below. I'll be posting consistently, and I'll have more updates starting tomorrow as we head towards 3 updates then a day. All right. With that being said, hope you all have a great rest of your evening, and early tomorrow morning, I'll be back with more for you tomorrow early tomorrow morning. Stay safe, everyone.